across this country right now. Some people teach this, and it's fine. I mean, we only do what we know and we teach and what we get taught. But what's happening? How many people here, if you find a bad guy behind a door in a building, you open the door and let your dog go in and bite him? Anybody here do that? Okay. Different instructors teach different things, but let me tell you what's happening across this country is there is police officers, I guess what you want to call them, ex-canine trainers and officers that are retired from departments. There happens to be one in Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department that will testify against you for stuff like that, and he's also an expert in SWAT operations. And he will flat come in and testify that any canine officer that opens the door or puts his dog into a position after the dog has indicated and barked saying there's somebody here, if that officer opens the door or puts his dog like up in the attic or does something like that, the only reason he did that was to bite that suspect, because that is tactically unsafe and it never should happen, because the officer just put his life in jeopardy. And juries are listening to it because he's testifying to, he's a SWAT expert, and he's coming in and saying, if you open that door to let your dog go in there, because at this point it became a SWAT operation. Once your dog identified that that person was hiding behind that door there, then you should call your dog back to you, and you let the people that are trained to get him out of there get him out. That's happening, whether we like it or not. And this guy's an expert. He's not a dummy. And he'll flat come in and say that is unsafe. And the only reason the officer had that door open, let that dog go in there, was to bite him. Had nothing to do with anything else, because it was very unsafe for that officer to open that door at all. So keep thinking about that in your heads and think about what's going on, because that's what's happening. And you got people like this guy that are coming in, and with most handlers, he's blowing you right out of the saddle, because he's 30 years SWAT expert, 25 years canine. And he's flat saying the only reason that's happening is because them officers want to talk about their dog bites. And that's what they're doing. So that gives you another idea. Okay, in tactical operations or any type of search, one of the first things that I see when I go places, the officers are not squared away about briefing a backup team. If you're going into a building or you're going into a tactical operation where someone is possibly armed or somebody is a bad guy that's hiding from you, your responsibility is to be able to brief a backup team and have a backup team. You should have, most people here have enough people in your department to at least have one, but you should have two. You should have an arresting officer and a shooting officer. And a shooting officer should carry a shotgun. You as a canine officer should not be searching anything or running around out here doing anything like this with your gun out. You should learn to shoot from your holster, and you should be proficient at qualifying from your holster. Your job is to watch your dog and be able to control your animal. That is your job. The backup team, you will have an arresting officer that will do all the talking. So if your dog engages with the suspect, and that's your job at that point, no one else jumps into the fight, your job is to call the dog off once the guy is under control, get the dog back to you, and the arresting officer will now at this time take charge of what's going on, not the canine officer. And you're going to see why in just a minute. And this is old. Don and I are getting ready to just do some new ones. I made this for Ed Frawley for Leerburg Video Productions in 1985. This tape is called Tactical Training Police Service Dog. God, how old is that, guys? Well, we're going to redo one with some of the new techniques and new things that we're doing today. Both these seminars were filmed. One was in Amarillo, Texas. The other one was in Chicago, Illinois. And you're going to see officers walking in on stuff and why we must have control on our dogs. Okay? And you're also going to see dogs that shouldn't even be on the street. And you're going to look at it and go, wow. And you're also going to look at what I wrote up here a while ago where I said you got to be a police officer Just because you got a dog now, all of a sudden that doesn't mean your dog is Superman and he's going to save your ass. But briefing a backup team is very important, and they're going to go through all the deals of it right here, and then you're going to actually hear an officer at a seminar after we gave the class, then he is going to attempt to brief Don and I in Amarillo, Texas. And
Our next training session deals with selecting and briefing your backup team. Whenever possible, take other K-9 officers with you on a search. If none are available, first consideration should be given to the people that you've worked with successfully in the past. If another officer has been involved in a shooting, do not take this man with you. Try and keep him as far back from the scene as possible. His fear scent will cause your dog to key on him. Briefing a backup team is important. It establishes the K-9 officer as the man in charge and sets the game plan for a well-run search. I'll first list the major points to cover in your briefing, and then we'll watch how it's done. First, introduce your dog. Tell them that you are in charge of the search and that you will give them direction during the search. If your dog approaches them during the search, don't worry, you will not bite them. Just stand still, but remain alert. Designate one man as the number 2 shotgun man. He stays 10 to 15 feet behind you to watch your back. He will be the arresting officer. The third man brings up the rear. His job is to provide cover during the arrest and to watch behind during the search. Tell them not to watch your dog, that that's your job. Their job is to watch high and to watch to the sides and to watch the rear. You, the K-9 officer, will make the decision on giving a warning for the suspect to give up. That's not their job to do. Once the man gives up, the number 2 man will be the arresting officer. He will do the talking with the suspect. Your job is to control your dog. Tell them that when your dog gets close to the suspect, you will tell them when the dog has scent, and at that point, they take cover. If the dog tangles with the suspect, tell them not to jump into the fight or they're going to get bit. Tell them not to get into the fight until you tell them to do so. If you enter a room, the number 2 man is to go in with you, while the number 3 man stays outside at the door to provide cover. Number 14, do not make a radio transmission that we've located the suspect until after the arrest and I say that it's okay to do so. Outside officers have a tendency to converge on the scene when they hear you found the suspect, and we need to have control of both the dog and the suspect before other people come charging in. If it becomes necessary to shoot and the dog is in the line of fire, do not hesitate because of the dog. He is replaceable and your lives are worth a lot more than a dog's. Tell them that if they do not follow your directions, you will stop the search and replace them. So, you can see there is a lot to remember in briefing your backup team. Some officers like to carry a card in their wallet with these points written on it until they have it memorized. Now, let's watch a K-9 officer give a team briefing during a training exercise and see if you can pick out the points that he missed.
Okay, we're going to work our way up to this location. Let me send it. We'll get to a point, and then I'll be the point man. You'll be the number 2 man. You'll be the number 3 man. You cover our backs. Once we take him, if my dog, I'll send him out on a search. If he goes on alert, I'll let you know. If he hits the guy, then once he hits the guy, then I'll call him back. You'll be the arresting man. Let me call him back. You'll give all commands from that point on.
Okay.
And you'll make the handcuffing once you give the commands on. Should my dog get up there and there's a gun battle, if he gets hit, that's it. Don't hesitate. Go ahead and shoot the dog. Or shoot through the dog. But do not, like I say, do not hesitate.
Okay.
So you stay about 15 feet behind me. You're watching our back, stay about 10 feet behind him. And once we make contact, do not get in front of my dog. Don't rush over here because he will build after.
Okay.
Remember cover and concealment.
Yeah, was that Texas for bite?
Yes.
Okay.
You'll feel the nail.
Okay. This officer did a pretty good job of briefing his team. He did forget to mention that when his dog gets scent, He'll tell the team, and at that point they should take cover. He also did not discuss room entry tactics, as far as the number 2 man going in with him, while the number 3 man stays outside to provide cover. He did not bring up the fact that there should be no premature radio transmissions until after the suspect is in custody. Now, let's watch a training exercise where the K-9 officer was told that a suspect had fired shots at the police and was last seen about 150 yards away at the end of a long row of buildings. The suspect keeps sticking his head out and looking back towards the police like he's waiting for them. This K-9 officer has already briefed his backup team, who in this case are the instructors. Now, this scenario is a recreation of an incident that happened in Los Angeles where the suspects had hidden a layoff man halfway down an alley, waiting to ambush the officers as they went by. The man at the end of the alley, who was sticking his head out, was trying to lure the police into a trap. In real life, the man waiting in the ambush was shot and killed by the K-9 officer and his number 2 man. Now, in this case, the hidden man is right behind the door behind the K-9 officer.
See anything now?
Okay. The odds are that some people would have been hurt here. This demonstrates the point that in real life, it's not the expected that's going to kill you. In this case, the officer was prepared for the man at the end of the alley. It's the unexpected that you're always going to have to be prepared for. This officer's dog was on leash during the entire search and really played no role in the search. If a police dog has the proper control and training, there are very few instances where a search should be done on leash. Let him move out in front and use his nose. Make him find the suspect. If you do building searches, field searches, and practice controlled, directed sendaways, like we taught in our video training police service dogs, your dog should be ready to handle this type of an exercise. Too many K-9 officers do searches on leash. Let's take a look at the same search with another officer. This man's dog alerts to the location of the hidden suspect. Poor personal tactics on the part of the officer get him killed. This officer was just shot. The search demonstrates important points. First, you must tell your backup team when your dog has scent. You and they should take cover at that point. Call the suspect out. If you must go and open the door, do it so that you maintain a position of cover while doing so. With doors that swing out, this almost always means from the side opposite the hinges. And when you take fire, learn to automatically return fire. Never assume that you are dead. Always return fire automatically. Now, let's watch the same search with very few tactical errors. This is a good tactical move. He sent his dog in ahead of him and then entered the room in a manner that a hidden suspect probably would not have anticipated. Again, we see good tactics. The officer makes sure he has control of his dog before he looks around the corner. And when he does look, it's with quick peeks in different locations. see good movement. He quickly passes the window and assumes his position of cover, and then sends his dog into the building. We see good off-leash control with this dog. Good communication with the backup team. It's important that all members of the backup team remain within sight of one another whenever possible. You don't want to have a situation develop where a suspect comes between different members of the backup team. You don't want to get your team involved in a crossfire situation. Now, tactically, this officer should practice taking the number 2 man in with him for cover when he goes into the buildings. At this point, the dog is losing a little concentration or interest. The officer may want to practice more searches where the dog has to work for some time before he makes his find. My guess is that this dog has worked a lot of searches. He's a good dog. There are exceptions to almost every tactical rule, and here we see the officer successfully opening the door from the hinge side and doing a good job of returning fire. In training, you should get in the habit of double tapping the suspect. If you do it in your training, you will probably do it on the street. This was a good search. The dog works well off leash. His handler has excellent control, and even though the dog misses the suspect behind the door, he did a good job of clearing rooms ahead of the handler, and he doesn't hesitate to go in for the bite after the gunshot. To learn to automatically return fire, you need to incorporate these type of practice sessions into your canine training program. The psychology behind this return fire concept is simple. If you were a suspect and had just shot at someone and they immediately returned fire, your mind would probably be more on getting your head down than pumping off a few more rounds. There is a hidden suspect with a shotgun just ahead of this officer. He's about to be shot. There is no return fire here. Come. One thing that might help here is for you to rename your training exercise. Call it a return fire exercise. If this helps get you in the frame of mind and it works, then do it. One thing is for sure, if you get used to being shot and assuming you're dead in training, it will probably go down the same way on the street if it would ever happen there. So we'll say it again, returning fire has to become a conditioned response. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is what happens when you try and do searches with a dog that's not ready for this level of work, either from a control standpoint or a bite development standpoint. Basically, the officers almost always know it. Even though they don't consciously admit it, they end up doing their own search while the dog is off on another plane doing his own thing. This next dog is a perfect example. By this point, we can already see that this is not a very good tactical search. In fact, this dog is a liability to the officer on the search. He's pulling the handler around on the leash, and the officer is relying too much on what he perceives as the ability of his dog. He opens the door here, assuming that everything is okay because the dog doesn't alert, when in fact the dog doesn't even check in the room, and then proceeds on to the point where he's going to get shot in a second. This dog would have nailed Donn Yarnall if it had not been on leash here in a second.
You gotta shoot, man. Shoot him back. Say, oh. Take this. Go ahead and take the bite.
Let's watch another search that really demonstrates the officer doing his own thing while his dog is off on his own. On a scale of 1 to 10, this dog has 0 drive. The dog is totally out of his element and should be moved back to beginning bite work training if he's going to be a police dog at all. He has absolutely no idea what he's out here doing. Unfortunately, departments that rely on donated dogs too often end up with this type of a police dog, and they blame their canine officers for the lack of performance of their police dogs. This officer just made a couple of tactical errors that are about to get him shot. If the helper would have been a little closer to the door, this incident would already have been over.
Now. What is the problem here?
So, in review, before you incorporate these type of tactical searches into your training program, the dog should be sound under friendly gunfire from a backup team. He should be totally finished with his bite development. He should be finished with building searches and have excellent off-leash control. By that we mean the dog should be able to be sent out and recalled at the handler's discretion. And finally, he should be able to be called back from an attack once he's on his way. The handler should be able to stop his dog before he is bitten and call him off from a distance after the bite. From the handler's standpoint, the officer should be able to properly brief his backup team. He should practice to automatically return gunfire with a policy of double tapping what he's shooting at. And he should have a thorough understanding of cover movement and concealment without a dog, and then incorporate these tactics into his canine training exercises. Now, let's move into our next training session on arrest procedures with a backup team. Arresting a felony suspect is a dangerous proposition no matter how you look at it. When you add the element,
Everybody see how old a tape this was? See the clothes Yarnall had on? Give him hell about that, his polyester pants. Okay, this is, even though this was made back in 1985, it's still got a lot of good qualities to it and a lot of good things to it that you should do with your backup teams and briefing backup teams and being in control of what's going to go on in your searches that you do. So keep that in mind and everything else. What are we looking at time-wise? 24. And so you always have that in your minds. You should be able to brief a backup team, and you shouldn't take anybody on a search with you that's scared of the dog or just been involved in a Donnybrook or something like that. You should leave them people clear out of the equation. They shouldn't be involved in it. So let's take another break, and then we'll come back and finish up.